Welcome to episode 18 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary with Catherine
and Kristen, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club where we take one book a month and dive into all the drama, adventure, and romance we can find.
Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Catherine.
So we're starting a new book today, which is always exciting.
I know, I love New Book Day.
Me too. So we're starting the Throne of Glass series, and this series is by author Sarah J Maas, who we've already done one of her books in the Crescent City series. So this is a different series, and it has 7 books and a prequel. The 7 books are Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, Tower of Dawn, and Kingdom of Ash.
It also has a collection of short stories that functions as a prequel called, the collection is called The Assassin's Blade. So there's sort of a bunch of debate if you're a fan of this series. There's a huge debate over the order in which you read the books, which seems kind of weird because normally you would think that you would read them in order that they are released. But and for the most part, I think it's decently straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a couple of little wrenches that are sort of thrown in that make it up for debate, we'll say, due to Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms that are supposed to sort of happen at the same time, and then with the prequel and everything like that. So, what's your favorite way to read the books when you reread the series?
So for me, if I'm going to reread the whole series, I'll read them the way that I read them first, which is the first 3, Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, and then the prequel. And then I'll read Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms. Usually I skip Tower of Dawn. Like, I've read it before. I know what happens. If I'm doing a reread, I don't always need it.
Yeah.
Like, I will sometimes. But if you've read the series, you know how Empire of Storms ends. And I can understand why people tandem read it. I feel like tandem read Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. I feel like that would take a lot of work because there's like chapter by chapter reads where you like switch back and forth between the 2 books. And that just seems like a lot of effort. But I can see why people do it because you don't finish Empire of Storms and then have to read all of Tower of Dawn before you get to Kingdom of Ash.
Right. So we'll just say that Empire of Storms ends on a really, really intense cliffhanger, like a really, really big, oh my God, what's going to happen? And at the time when it came out, everyone was like, oh, we only have to wait a year for Kingdom of Ash. But then Sarah J Maas actually, like, instead of releasing the last book to solve everything, puts another story out first based on another set of characters in the universe. So a lot of people were really unhappy with like the fact that she left this huge cliffhanger out in the open for longer than I guess what people felt necessary, we'll say.
Yes. And it honestly, if I'm being honest about the cliffhanger of that book, it's the biggest one that I have ever dealt with in my life, I think. And I know that's like so
dramatic.
So dramatic, but I think it was. It didn't help that I read Empire of Storms when it came out, so that it was literally years before I got the next one that actually solved it, but I think it was the biggest one I've ever had to deal with.
It's a very big one, yeah.
So get ready for that if this is your first read. Yeah, so sometimes when I reread too, I do skip the prequel. I do skip Assassin's Blade because I know what happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't really lead to the main story that I care, the main love interest arc that I care about, but all
Yeah.
the other stories, I'm like, yes. What about you?
Um, so I agree with you. If I were gonna do a full reread, like if I wanted to include every sort of aspect of it, I would do it the same way. Um, However, I will rarely, if ever, do a full reread. Like
Fair.
mostly I just will skip to the books that I like the best. So like
Mm-hmm.
that's really the back three. So Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, and Kingdom of Ash.
Sure.
Um, I don't dislike Tower of Dawn. Like I think you really, really disliked it.
I just didn't care. I think I read
Yeah.
it once and I was like, well, that was enough.
Yes. And to be fair, like I agree. When I heard it was being released, I was like, ugh, no, I don't want this. I just want to get back to our main character and what they're dealing with. But when it came out and I actually read it, it was good. Like I'm not taken away
Oh, yeah, yeah.
from the story itself. Like Sarah J got me into it. Like the way
Yes.
she wrote it, I did like it.
Yeah. And it has so many important parts to it that you need before you go into the last book of the
Yes.
series. Like, you
100%.
cannot skip it. There is,
No.
so the funny thing is about these two questions is like, if you're ever on Facebook and you try to join a Sarah J Maas group, a lot of them will be like, do not ask if you need to read Tower of Dawn. You do. And don't ask when you need to read the prequel. Because like those are the like questions that are asked by so many people getting into the series. But it's more so like a actually search the group and you'll find an answer, or like Google it and you'll
Yeah.
find an answer, as opposed to we're giving you
Yeah.
an answer right now though.
We are giving you the answer. So like, yeah, I didn't dislike Tower of Dawn, but I again like I know what happens now. I've read it. And when you're reading Empire of Storms, which is book 5, and you get that huge cliffhanger, the last thing I want to do
Mm-hmm.
is go back and then read Tower of Dawn. Like, so I'll skip it. So
Yeah.
normally if I'm doing a reread, I'll just go right to the 4, 5, and 6, and then I get my fix.
4, 5, and 6, and you'll get your fix.
Yeah.
I
Like
loved it.
that was not even intentional. That was completely by accident. I'm just that amazing. Uh, so yeah, it's just you know. But again, I'm a selective reader. I want to read the book that's going to make me happy.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So like, if I know what has happened in the series, I don't feel it necessary for myself to
Mm-hmm.
go back and do everything again just to get my happiness fix where I need it.
Yes, and I feel like that's the biggest thing with this series is if you're like me and you read the first 3 and then the prequel and you're trying to do a reread, you don't want to go back to the prequel because it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
And maybe I should try to read it first, but I just for some reason my brain doesn't want to. It always wants to start with Throne of Glass. That's just an issue.
But do you know what? Okay, so if you are unaware, the so I understand why some people might say to do the prequel first.
Mhm.
In all fairness, like I get it. It's a prequel. You learn about our main character's life before the events of the book. So like I get it. But at the same time, I feel like you'll get either way too emotionally invested in the characters in the prequel only to like never
Yeah.
hear from them again,
Mhm.
or you almost aren't as invested because they're just short stories.
Exactly. And I think that's a big thing for me is I don't generally love short stories.
Yeah.
Like if I don't often pick up a compilation of short stories to read. I would much rather read a novel.
Yes.
And like to be fair to Assassin's Blade, the short stories do like lean off each other, and they are in order, and it is, I feel like if she could have easily just put some transitionary chapters and made it a full book of just before
Yeah.
times, which I would have preferred. But I do think that it's not the best way to get into the story originally, because you won't fall in love with the characters like you should. Or you might too much and then be
Yes.
sad.
Yes, 100%. So I guess on that note, this is just our heads up that we are not a spoiler-free zone, and things are gonna get a little saucy.
I guess for this series, though, we're going to try to not spoil anything past the book we're reading.
Right. So yeah, I guess no spoilers for this book, but we're also not going to spoil the series for you if you get into it and you want to move on.
Exactly. We might point out things that might be a bit.
We might.
We might. Let's just.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. So, kind of as we mentioned before, because we've talked about Sarah J Maas a few times on this podcast, this was the first series that she wrote. So she started Throne of Glass, the first book, at age 16. And at the time, it was titled Queen of Glass. And it was being released chapter by chapter on fictionpress.com, which is generally fan fiction or like fiction that people are just writing on their own.
Right.
And it was one of the more popular series at the time. And she decided to take it down and try to publish it, which is obviously like the best decision that she did make, because we got this series out of it and all of the other ones after. So, because she started writing it as a young adult, I feel like this book is very much in the YA category. Mm-hmm. And I would even say the next book as well is also, maybe the next two books are very in the YA category. Heir of Fire starts to get a little less, but definitely Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight are very much young adults.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that she matured with, like, she matured the books as she also matured, which is it's a really nice way to see her like grow, see the character grow.
Yes. And like this series is much more adventure than romance, which is a bit different than the A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Yes.
Series.
Yeah, that's true. So Throne of Glass introduces our main character, Celaena Sardothian, who starts the book off imprisoned because she is an infamous assassin. She is Adarlan's assassin. So she is given a choice that she cannot refuse and has a chance at freedom. The first book introduces so many important characters and so many relationships and a lot of Easter eggs for the rest of the series that you obviously won't pick up on your first read through, but maybe you will on the second or third.
Yeah, and maybe sometimes not until the fourth or fifth.
Right.
It's one of those books.
It is. There's a lot to discover with her writing, which is one of the reasons why I find her so amazing to read. Agreed.
So this week we're doing chapters 1 to 10. And I personally kind of love how this book starts, except for this first part that I'm going to talk about, which is the first thing that we kind of learn is that she spent a year of slavery in the salt mines of Endovier.
Yeah, and
Endovier.
Also, guys, don't judge our pronunciation on this. Like, there's a lot of weird names. So if we get things wrong, we're sorry.
I have listened to the audiobooks though, but it is.
So have I.
It's Endovier. It's Endovier.
I know it's Endovier, but it's spelled IER at the end. I automatically think Endovier. I can't help it. It's the way the French mind works. I can't turn it off.
That's fair.
Anyway.
Yes. So, after laughing at it, she spent a year of slavery in the salt mines of Endovier. And at this current moment in time, she's kind of being walked around in shackles at sword point. And she doesn't know what's going on, and we have no clue what's going on. But it's mentioned that she gets extra guards because she's Adarlan's most notorious assassin. So a hooded man is kind of walking her around in circles in this building, trying to confuse her so she doesn't know where they are. But Celaena is better than that, and she can't be fooled by this silly boy. But she also doesn't know why he's here. She finds out that her escort is Chaol Westfall, and he is the captain of the Royal Guard. And that kind of gives her a bit of a pause and frightens her a bit, which we don't really understand why either, but like clearly it's a big title to be the captain of the Royal Guard. She does mention that every morning she wakes up and starts the day with the mantra, "I will not be afraid."
I mean, I can understand that too, because she's in a slave camp sort of scenario. So yeah, I can imagine that waking up with a mantra is probably a good idea.
It'll help you get through the day, I would assume, better than not having one.
Yeah.
She tries to make a bit of small talk with Chaol, but he's not having it. So she in this instant, she imagines spilling Chaol's blood, which is super bloodthirsty. She thinks of the kind of different scenarios where she could get away. There's like 6 guards trailing them, but she has all this confidence that like she could basically kill them all and get out of there.
She's so badass. I love it.
Yeah, same.
And the way that she writes about her is, you also have confidence that she could do it. The way she talks, you're like, yeah, I believe this.
Yeah, and like I feel like when she's in the situations and she's like, I could do this, this, and this, and then be out of here, you're like, yeah, she could do all those things.
Yeah.
So it's good writing, but it's also like she's very clearly a very confident badass character that can fuck shit up.
Exactly.
She does in her head, this is another one that's in first person, mention one instance when an overseer pushed her too hard on the wrong day and she put a pickaxe in his gut. And it's just like, this is the first few lines of this book, right? Like, it's not even, you're like, this is the kind of book we're reading. Okay.
Yeah.
She obviously is also enslaved. So she kind of talks about the other enslaved people that are there, and they're Adarlan's greatest criminals, poorest citizens, latest conquests, and some rebels. So some citizens are also there because they tried to practice magic, even though apparently that's impossible because magic has vanished from the kingdoms, which is an interesting way to put it. Celaena casually wonders if she would have been better off if she had hanged the night she was betrayed. And then she kind of thinks, oh shit, maybe I'm being hanged today. Like maybe that's why they're coming to get me. And finally, after all of this maze work, they stop at a room and she's kind of sure this is it. She's like, well, I'd warrant an execution by the captain of the guard, so this makes sense. Like, he's definitely bringing me here to murder me.
Yeah.
She does notice that there's 14 royal guards in the room, and then sees the Crown Prince, which is obviously a surprise. Captain Westfall, who I'm just going to call Chaol from now on, takes down his hood, and she realizes he's young to be the captain of the guard, but he's not particularly handsome, she kind of mentions in her head, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is interesting. The prince asks, I guess, Chaol if it's her, and clearly it is. Who the fuck else do you think that Chaol's bringing to you? Like, what a dumb question. But she kind of refuses to bow to him. As she reasons, if she's like on the way to the gallows, she'll not spend her last seconds in groveling submission, which I think is another example of how badass she is. But then she's basically thrown to the floor by a man holding her neck, and he has red cheeks and a sandy mustache, is all we get before she's literally shoved to the floor. She's still in chains behind her back, I assume, so she can't catch herself, and she kind of lands like a brick. She like tries to keep her tears in because of how much of it hurt to fall. Um, the guy's obviously an asshole. At
Yep.
the very least. We get his name, Duke Perrington, and he is not attractive at all, in the least.
Well, he's also like, I don't want to say old because he's not like old, but he's like, so at this point, Celaena is about like, she's still a teenager, right? She's like 18, 19,
Yeah,
right?
she's 18, yeah.
18. He's probably in his like 40s.
Yeah, 40s or
So
50s.
40s or 50s, right? So, he's not attractive at all, but also like he's oldish in comparison.
Yes, that's a good point. Um, and he's obviously one of those people that is very angry, gets very red in the face when they're angry.
Yeah. And also
What I
like
feel like.
just the fact that he like pushed her down onto the ground, it obviously says a lot about what he thinks of people that are at a lower station than him.
Yeah, definitely. Um, the Crown Prince, Dorian, he seems to think it's a bit foolish to kind of force somebody to bow to him, since the purpose of bowing is to kind of, in his words, show allegiance. Um, he mentions that clearly Celaena has no love for his father, and he says her full name, Celaena Sardothian, kind of like it means something. So we don't really know the whole story behind everything now, but it's obviously clear that like she's a big dog
Yeah.
in this castle. Dorian then like kind of artfully dismisses the Duke to tell him to go to his meetings with the treasurer, which I I reading this time, I didn't know if this actually meant anything. I can't remember it ever coming up of why he would have gone, other than if it was just like to check on how shit's
Yeah.
going in the slave place.
Yeah, I think it's just political for this book.
Yeah. I think it's probably just to like get his face in there at this point.
Yeah.
So he's gone and she's there and she's thinking of if she escapes, how she would love to return the Duke's cold greeting. And I do absolutely love how bloodthirsty she is because she wants to kick his ass. We
Yes.
all, which is fair. That's a dick move, pushing someone down who's in shackles already. Um, we get a tiny bit of her past here in her head again. She was trained to be an assassin since she was 8, and the king of assassins found her on the banks of a frozen river, and she was half dead. Um, so like it's a very small tidbit, but it gives us a bit of information about her. She also mentions that Dorian is achingly handsome, and she's kind of annoyed by it because she's like, crown princes shouldn't be this cute. This is annoying.
Yeah.
But she's also like super grimy right now because obviously she's been in a mine for over a year. Like I don't think they have regular baths. Like
No.
I can only imagine.
How smelly she is.
Yeah, like I can't imagine how she lasted that long anyway. But she does think about how like she has beautiful features, and I love that she is so confident and she knows how to like play up I think in the book she says she plays up her average features to match her more extraordinary ones. So she says that her extraordinary features are her like golden hair and her eyes, because they have a golden circle around the pupil. So those two features of hers are like above average. And she has some average ones, but she knows how to use cosmetics to make herself look hot as fuck. Which I appreciate. Like, I'm glad that she knows that she's hot.
Yeah.
Other than right now, where she obviously feels a bit of shame about her current appearance because she is grimy AF.
Yeah.
So Celaena and Dorian have a bit of banter back and forth. And he kind of acknowledges that she, I guess, was the best assassin in Adarlan and possibly even in Aurelia. And we don't know what these places are yet in the book. We do hear, though, at this point, that the average life expectancy of anyone in Endovier is a month. So she's obviously lived 12 times the average life expectancy, which obviously is impressive. Then we hear about her one escape attempt, because obviously she's been there for a very long time. But I guess 4 months after she arrived, she apparently tried to escape. And Chaol mentions that there's no hope of escaping Endovier, since the sentries are basically such sharpshooters that if anyone tries to escape, it's suicide. And Celaena says that she basically just snapped that one day. And Chaol's kind of pissed that that's an explanation. He's like, you killed 24 people, her overseer, and 23 sentries before they like knocked her out, basically. He's like, you can't. He's so righteous. It's like so sickening to me, especially in this part, because he's so righteous about like, you killed 24 people. And she's like, we literally dig mass graves every week for all of the slaves here, and you're gonna bitch at me for killing 24 people that
Whip us and like rape us and
are slave. Like,
yeah,
what the fuck?
like
Like, this whole part just blows my mind.
he
But
but that is sort of his. So obviously KL ends up being one of our if you can tell, KL ends up being one of our main characters,
mhm,
and that is his defining character trait, right? Is
mhm.
loyalty to his king and to his country. So, those were men on the king's payroll. So yeah, he's gonna be pissed. Like, and in his mind, everyone who's in Endovier, they are like enemies.
They should be there.
And they deserve to be there and they deserve to die. The sentries do not. So yeah, like I also agree with you. I hate the fact that he's so fucking self-righteous in this moment, but like
Mhm.
it speaks to who he is as a character.
Yeah. And I think it's a it's a bit, he's young too, which we'll get into a bit later. He's 22. But he I feel like he thinks that everyone who works for the king would act in the same way that he would, because he's a 22-year-old child. Like, he doesn't
His prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed.
he doesn't realize that people would actually just whip people for fun, and that given the power dynamics, they would rape people and they would abuse their power. I don't think he can process that in his head, even though he's looking at a woman on the floor who's clearly
Been through some shit.
smelly and dirty and been through shit. But he's also like, she's an assassin that everyone's fucking afraid of. She deserves this. So like,
Yeah.
it's two edges that he comes from. I understand it, but I also hate it.
Yeah. Agreed.
Anyway, she does say that she was a fingertip away from the wall, which is, there's a wall enclosing Endovier. So she also says that most people that try to escape, they only make it 3 feet before they're murdered,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess Chaol wouldn't call it murdered, but sure. And she made it almost 363 feet, which would have been to the wall. So the only thing is, the king didn't want her dead, so they couldn't shoot her, which is obviously good for her story, but you have to kind of imagine that this might have been a bit of a suicide attempt anyway on her part. And she kind of gets into it with Dorian a bit after this, and he's like, you had to know that it was suicide. And she was like, yes. So she snapped, and she didn't want to be there anymore. Either she was going to make it over the wall or they were going to kill her. Neither happened. So now she's in this room 8 months after that.
Yeah. Like, I feel really bad for her, because can you imagine, like, trying your best to escape knowing it would be a death sentence and then realizing they're not going to kill you and then having to work there for 8 more months? Like,
Yeah. Especially since obviously all the guards are going to be like, you killed 24 of us.
yeah. But also, they're going to be so friggin' scared of her.
Well, they should be.
And yeah, they should be.
Well, the fact that they're giving them pickaxes is just like, I know they need to use them to mine the salt, but
don't give the most famous assassin in the country a pickaxe. Just don't.
It just doesn't seem smart.
Yeah.
Luckily for them, she didn't snap again.
Yes.
So I guess they're still kind of like having a bit of a conversation, and Celaena kind of realizes that they must want her for some reason, because Dorian comments on the fact that he could hide her scars, because she has apparently 3 scars on her back, 3 large scars, and possibly a few others, but they could hide those with dresses. She's like, if they're going to kill me, they wouldn't put me in a dress first.
That's true.
So she kind of confronts them, and Dorian kicks most of the people except for Chaol out of the room, which Celaena thinks is really dumb because she is an assassin. But we're not calling Dorian smart at this point, I don't think.
No.
Especially because he starts to explain to her that he wants her to compete as his champion in a tournament. And if she were to win this tournament, she could become the king's champion, which, if you read between the lines, means assassin. And she would receive a salary as the champion. And she could be free after, quote, 6 years, which they end up haggling about. And it gets down to 4 before they agree on either side. But if she fails in the tournament, she'll be sent back to Endovier. So obviously she's going to agree, because like, even if she just gets out for a few weeks, it's better than staying. So she also needs to compete under an alias, since no one other than the king, I guess, and a few of his trusted people discovered who she really was. And most people expect Celaena Sardothian to be older.
Yeah, I mean, she's a very successful assassin, so I guess they wouldn't expect like a super successful assassin to be like this 18-year-old beautiful girl.
Yeah, and she's been in a mine for a year as a slave, so she was put there when she was 17. Like, this famed assassin was 17 when she was caught. So like, when did she start? And obviously we heard that she was trained since 8, but to get the name, it's kind of wild. So she kind of understands, but she's also a bit pissed about it, because she takes a lot of pride in who she is, and that she is such a famous assassin. She does, though, like, as they make their agreement, almost feel a bit of hope, but she doesn't want to let herself, because obviously anything could happen. After they leave this room with Dorian, she is finally forcefully cleaned and then given a real bed and real food, which she's not accustomed to for the last year. So she does end up throwing up her food, and she also ends up sleeping on the floor because she's not used to comfortable beds anymore, which is a
Mm.
trope. A trope, but it's super sad, but it is very tropey.
Yeah.
Because when Chaol comes in the next morning, of course she's lying on the floor because she couldn't get comfortable in the bed. Uh, there is a like the next morning there is a cute-ish, I guess, sad, very depressing could be another word for it, scene where she kind of sees sunlight, and it's the first time she's seen it in what must feel like forever. I like has she not seen it for over a year? I don't understand how the minds work,
I
but
don't either. I always thought that salt mines were like open to the elements.
yeah, so did I, but it seems like she saw the sunlight and she was like in shock. And then in later chapters you hear that she is very pale, so it sounds like she's not open to the elements at all. I guess mining is underground.
Yeah, I guess.
So yeah, I guess she hasn't seen the sun in a year, which that in itself I would not be able to survive. Uh, I guess somebody comes to do her hair and put her in a fine dress, and she says that the dress kind of makes her look less thin she is. And she admires herself in the mirror for 5 minutes before Kale finally has to pull her away. And I kind of love that scene too because I'm like, it's such a I love how confident she is in her body and in herself and how much she loves herself. I just think it's such a great message. Um, and I think it's something that Sarah J. Maas does well with a lot of her main characters in that they are strong and they're fit and they're not super thin without a reason to be super thin. Like in this book, obviously, Celaena is super thin right now because she needs to eat. And in the next scene, she even talks about how she wishes that she could eat until her belly was full and feel like she could never eat again. But actually, I think that was the last scene. But she can't force herself to because then she got sick. Um, but I do think that there's a lot of body positivity in these books.
Yeah. And I enjoy, like you said, that it's like she's admiring herself in the mirror and she's not apologetic. And like she's not
Mhm.
apologetic for being like, I don't want to say shallow because she's not shallow, but for appreciating appearance, right?
Yes.
Like she's not ashamed to say like I like being pretty, I like pretty things, I like spending my money on clothes. Like she's not apologizing for being like a stereotypical female in that way,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
And she's
So,
such a badass, and you would think that it would contrast this, but it doesn't.
no.
They pair very nicely together, and it's different from what you would normally get in a book, I would think.
Well, that's it, right? It's so normal for like the badass bitch who could beat everyone up. Like, oh, she's not like other girls. She
Mm.
like takes 5 minutes to get ready in the morning and she's effortlessly beautiful and
Are we
like,
talking
no.
about Elena and Bitten? Like,
Ugh.
are we talking about beers, pizza, and
Yeah. But like I enjoy that Celaena has talked about, yeah, I've got some really good features, but I also have some normal ones too. So I know how to accentuate myself and make myself look hot. And like, yeah, I like looking in the mirror myself. Like, I think I'm a piece. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly?
I enjoy that we're getting this type of character.
I agree. Yeah. So after, I guess, Kale pulls her away, she can't believe that she's actually leaving. And she does also feel a bit guilty, obviously, because there are so many people in the mine who are slaves that she knows they're never going to leave. And she says, even in death, they'll have to stay there because she says the slaves dig mass graves monthly, weekly is what that word is. So clearly, it's a very it's a very hard time for her because she knows that yes, she's getting away, but there's so many other people that are there and are going to die there, and she can't do anything about it. And it kind of gives you a bit of an insight into who she is as a person.
Yeah. She's a helper.
She is, yes. She's a people pleaser in a few ways.
Yes.
She does also end up getting a horse for their journey, but then she's put in chains, and her chains are connected to Chaol's horse. And she kind of tries to figure out a few ways to like get them off or to undo his saddle so that she can pull them away and get away. But I don't think anything would really work out before she was stopped or killed. But they start their journey and they go through Oakwald Forest. And it's said that Oakwald Forest is kind of a divide between the civilized lands in the east and the uncharted lands in the west. And the uncharted lands are home to the descendants of the Witch Kingdom, which is just I'm going to say a bit of an Easter egg. Chaol and Celaena talk a bit on the journey, and I say talk loosely. We do get Chaol to admit his age, which is 22, and Celaena is 18. She also finds out that he's well born, and he could have been a lord, but we don't know much about that, and that he isn't married. But all in all, he is very against chit-chat in this moment. After a while, they stop for lunch, and we get another piece of backstory on Celaena. We get that the king of the assassins who found her was Arabin Hamel, and he never allowed her to return home to Terrasen. There's also some chat among, I guess, the soldiers and Chaol and her, and like she mentions that the forest is apparently King Brannon's forest. We don't know who he is yet. But it used to be home to fairies, and the current king got rid of them. So it seems like there was a lot of burning and murdering with this current king, because the soldiers also kind of brag that they got rid of the fae too. So there used to be fae in this world, but these soldiers have gotten rid of them, in their words.
And when we say fae, we do mean like sort of the same type of fae from the Crescent City series. Like Sarah J likes to write about the same sort of species, so they're the same.
Yeah, exactly. Chaol then kind of asks her what she knows about the forest, because it's kind of a bit clear that she knows more than she's letting on. And she just says that before the king's conquest, so this king, that the forest was cloaked in magic, and that's all she's going to reveal to him. And the soldiers kind of stop listening, but she notices that Chaol kind of looks at her like he knows there's more to it, but she's not going to say it. In her head, she does say that the immortal fae were the original settlers of the continent, and they ruled the fairies, gnomes, sprints, and goblins, and all other creatures that were around. So I don't know where these humans came in, if they're just invasive species or what is going on. After the king started his campaign, they all fled. So the king outlawed everybody, which seems kind of absurd, because like, how can you outlaw a person type creature? Like, how can you outlaw a fae? They're a living being. It just seems a bit crazy. There's a quote here about the king eradicating magic so thoroughly that even those who had magic in their blood started to believe it had never existed. And Celaena says that she's one of them. So you kind of get that she has some kind of magic in her blood. We don't know what it is.
Correct.
A month after the king banned magic, which is an interesting thing to do, it apparently actually disappeared on its own. And all the healers, mages, and magical books were all burnt. So it's kind of like a witches burning at the stake moment.
Yeah, it's like a Salem witch trial, except it's anybody who's done magic. And like, it's funny because this world, magic was such an ingrained part of who they were as people and as a society. And then to all of a sudden be like, no, there's no magic anymore, and we're gonna kill everybody who practiced it. Like, you would never think in a million years that that would happen.
Yeah. It is definitely an interesting take, though, because it kind of makes you think, like, was Sarah J. Maas kind of thinking of our past and witch burnings? And, like, if there was actual magic in our world, could it be taken out by just one crazy monopoly of a man? Anyway,
Yeah.
she she also kind of reminisces a bit that her gifts would probably have killed her by now. Um, but we don't get anything else on what like her actual magic gifts were. Uh, so I guess they kind of like camp out for the night. And when she wakes up the next morning in her small tent where she's shackled to a guard, I don't
Ew.
know exactly what that meant. I don't know if that meant that someone slept next to her, which is gross, or if someone had to sit outside, which is equally awful for that person. But like, I don't, anyway. There, there are white flowers and childlike footprints at the bottom of her bed. So she like frantically tries to get rid of the footprints and she puts the flowers into her saddlebag because she thinks that it's something supernatural, we'll say. Because then when she gets up in the morning, she's kind of listening around to see if anyone's talking about fairies or anything like that. There's kind of I guess, a jump of about they travel for 2 weeks and there's a lot of rain during this time. And she feels like she's going to decay because she's so wet all the time. Um, then I guess after this point, it's more. I feel like that was maybe spring. No, it's winter. It's fall. So I don't know. She says the rain season's kind of done, and then it gets a bit drier. So Dorian, at one point, comes up to Chaol, who obviously she's attached to, and he tells him to come see the view. And then Chaol's like, clearly Celaena has to come anywhere I go. Like, we're attached. And he's like, Dorian's like, yeah, you can bring that one. So they go up to a mountain, and the view is the castle, which is their destination, which is a very iconic moment, I would say, in the book because it's the first look at it. So
Yeah, the glass castle almost has its own, like, is its own character. It's very prominently featured throughout, and it
mhm.
it interacts with with Celaena quite a bit.
Yes. So we also get that the glass castle was originally built on a stone castle that had been there, and I'm assuming it's for aesthetic purposes, like that you would build a glass castle.
I think
I
so.
don't know why else you'd do it.
But it's like extra firm glass.
Yes, 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 yes. It's not just like super brittle. It's not like blown glass and you just nobody walks in that part. It's like livable spaces. There's rooms in there, like
Yeah.
interesting architecture, I'll
Uh-huh.
say.
Yeah.
So they decide to camp there for the night because I guess it's getting late and they don't want to show up kind of after dark or anything.
Right?
So they want it to be a big parade.
Yeah.
So they, I guess, she's still kind of where she was when they were brought up there. And Chaol kind of notices that she's quiet. And she admits that it's odd to see the place she used to live. Like, she lived there, and she says, especially since she doesn't really understand how she was captured. And this is, I guess, another little tidbit. She does let on that she thinks it may have been another assassin who kind of turned her in. And he is like, oh, well, you can't trust assassins. And she does kind of think to herself that, like, well, she says to him, like, I didn't trust them at all.
Yeah.
So he's a bit prejudiced against her, which like I understand why, but it's still a bit annoying after being in her head. But he does try to kind of empathize with her again, and he says that Endovier must have been awful, which is like on
Dude,
the
no
scale of
shit.
on the scale of pickup lines, I'm like that's a 0. But she does open up to him a bit about it, and she says that I guess the people there were told to treat her with extra care by the king. So when they whipped her, they would put salt in the wounds, and it was like salt that she had mined herself. So they would put salt on her back, and they whipped her so often that the wounds couldn't close. So obviously that's why she has the scars. And she says that if she wasn't helped out by some of the other people there, then she would have died within the first few weeks.
Right. So at least the whole like dying in a month thing is it's accurate, but at the same time it's not because she got help. Like
Yes.
she didn't make it all on her own.
No, exactly. That's a really good point. Yeah. So she kind of wakes up, I guess, in the middle of the night, and she's had a dream that she's in a mass grave in Endovier, and that they keep piling bodies on top of her, and no one hears her scream. She says it's kind of a recurring dream, but then she like,
It sounds terrible.
yes, it sounds completely awful. But then she kind of like sits up, and they're all outside because it's warm enough that they don't need tents. So she kind of sits up, and she's like looking at the glass castle in the distance, and she's kind of thinking about how she's going to win this tournament. She's going to do her time, and then she'll be free, and she'll never have to worry about the rise and fall of kingdoms again. Then we switch perspectives a tiny bit for just a second, and we get that Dorian is watching her, and he finds her beautiful and notices kind of that it seems like the stars are shining down on just her. And then he's like, what the fuck are you thinking? She's an assassin and she would kill you in a second. So you need to stop thinking about how beautiful she is, which is definitely interesting.
True story. So we move on and the whole party enter the city. And I guess they're like walking on their horses through town. Celaena notices that everyone is staring at her. So she sort of goes from, "Oh, I'm a prisoner," to, "Oh, well, no, I'm painted up. I'm dressing really pretty." So she thinks that everyone else is convinced that she must be some sort of lady for Prince Dorian to marry. She also, I guess, like they're walking through town and she spies a dress shop and she talks about how badly she wants to go shopping. Would not be me.
Me neither.
If it was my first day of freedom, that's not what I'd do. But I mean, who am I to say?
Well, yeah, I can't really think of what I'd do right now, but that's a good question. Maybe for next week.
Yeah. Um she also is taking notice of the slaves that are working down at the docks. She says it looks like it's a mix of rebels and of people who did used to practice magic. But she also said it's mostly just ordinary people.
Hmm.
Um, men, women, families, like they didn't discriminate. They took everybody. Um she sort of thought to herself that she didn't like being attached to the prince's party. Like she didn't want people to think she was with them. She didn't want the slaves to think that she was included or part of their group.
Hmm.
Um because she says like I've worked hard. I've suffered beside them. So again, we're getting a little bit more of an onion of what Celaena actually is.
Yeah.
She also sort of brings up a moment from the Assassin's Blade novella here about the Pirate King and freeing 200 of his slaves. And she was like, "Yeah, I did that 2 years ago." And yeah, it's at 16, she did all these crazy things. And now this year, that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we're sort of learning that she's not just an assassin, she's not just a criminal, like she has layers, and I think we've already sort of established that she's primarily a good person. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like we haven't got the feeling that she's an evil person or anything like that,
No. And
right? Like
she's also a child as well. Like if she's 18 too, but
yeah.
yeah.
but, like, sometimes you can tell when a character is, like, mostly bad or mostly good or,
Mhm.
ethically ambiguous.
Mhm.
But you can already tell, like, the fact that she's, like, thinking of the slave people and, like, feeling guilty for leaving them behind, like, we can sort of already tell that she's more on the good side of the spectrum than she is on the bad side.
Yeah.
Um, she also really doesn't like the idea of sleeping in the glass castle.
Mhm.
Because I guess because she's part of the competition and because she's on, uh, Prince Dorian's team, she gets to live in the castle and sleep in the castle, so, she doesn't want to sleep in the glass castle itself. I don't know if she's, like, nervous about it.
Mhm.
So Dorian finds her a room in the stone castle, which is sort of like, the older castle that's attached to, the glass castle, like, they're sort of merging together as one big space instead of, like, 2 separate areas. So she was, like, petrified. She didn't wanna step on the glass to go into the glass castle. Um, we learn that the competition starts tomorrow. Like, they're getting right into it. And her bedroom that she's been given is, like, super nice. Um, it's got a bedroom, it's got a bathroom, it's got a dining room, it's got a dressing room, a music room, and a gaming room, like her apartment in the castle. So, like, her room in the stone castle is, like, bigger than my entire house. It seems like.
Yeah, it does sound like it.
It's
It's, like,
huge.
multi-layered, and there's a game room, and it's just wild.
Yeah. Anyway. So of course, in true assassin fashion, she goes into her room and analyzes all like the exits, and she's doing it throughout the castle whenever she's shown anything. She's like, where's an exit? Where's an entrance? Where are the guards stationed? And all that. Um, once she's in her room, she makes a weapon out of hairpins and thread. So essentially she like ties a bunch of bone hairpins and then she like tucks it. I don't know if they're wearing corsets at this time, but like she tucks it like right next to her boobs so that if
Mhm.
anybody's helping her get dressed, they're still fine.
Yeah.
Um a tailor comes and measures her for a bunch of dresses, which is like, again, they're spending a lot of expense on just finding who's gonna be the king's champion, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's a lot of money for this.
Yeah, it seems like no real reason why
Oh,
they would
because
actually do this.
the king just likes to spend money, I think.
Well, yeah, and that well, you really gotta think maybe it's Dorian's money. I don't know if
Oh,
he has a lot of
maybe.
money, but who knows?
So Taylor came, measured her dresses, servants came and washed her a bit better, cut her nails, smoothed her calluses. I don't know how on earth you do that in one session.
Onshore.
And she says she's being treated much better than she thought she would expect.
Mhm.
Um, she meets a servant, so they gave her a servant, which also is sort of like, should you have given her that servant? Just, I don't know, seems a bit shaky.
It's very different from what she was just dealing with,
Yes,
at the very least.
yes, like, hey, you were a slave, now you could be a highfalutin, classy lady.
Mhm. And now you basically have someone slaving over you, which is like
Yeah, it's so weird.
I feel like she could easily turn slaves against everybody else on her side because she
Oh,
has also been in that position. Like it just seems dumb to give her access to people that are lowly.
true story. Anyway, her servant's name is Philippa, and apparently she is like this again, think of like Juliet from Romeo and Juliet. Think of like her nurse. That's the vibe I get,
Uh, I didn't
right?
think of that, but I love it.
Yep. So apparently like Philippa's like super lippy and like knows who she is, and they I guess purposely give her that servant so that she doesn't like convince everyone else to jump out the window.
Yeah, doesn't start a cult of her own.
Yeah. So I guess we have Celaena settling down in her room, and then we get a shift to Dorian speaking to his father. Apparently they do not get along at all. And the king has very specific reactions he wants out of his court. So yeah, the king doesn't tolerate like being spoken to in any sort of rude way. And Dorian sort of tried, and the king hit him, which is
Something.
it is something. Like, it just, you're gonna speak to me that way, hiya. It's just very rude.
Yes. Also abuse. But
Yes, abuse. Yes. So then we jump back to Celaena. She asks Chaol to give her a tour of the stone castle. Um so she's sort of trying to case the joint. Um like to get away, and he's sort of like, yeah, okay, I'll give you a tour. Like, you're a moron, dude. It's her first day in the castle. What do you think she's doing? You think she's like living her best life going shopping? Like, no, she's obviously she's obviously gonna want to look around his house or wherever. So again, we're mentioning that she again doesn't want to mention she doesn't want to leave the stone castle and move into the glass castle at all. Like, won't even put a finger or toe there. She says she doesn't really think it's safe. I guess because of the glass.
Yeah, I get the thought process, but
Yeah. Chaol mentions, so I guess Chaol's giving her a tour, and they pass by the queen's sort of court, like her chambers. This sort of, the fact that he's like telling her where things are is sort of a moronic move. Like, he just told her where the king is staying. She's an assassin. She could be in and out lickety split. Like, it's wild. And he's just oblivious. Like, no clue. He's a moron.
Yeah.
We also get a little bit of a discussion here about Prince Holland. So he is sort of one of the heirs to the court. He is the younger brother after Dorian. So, he's rotten. So apparently he's the heir to the throne, but he's not anything like Dorian. Apparently he's like rotten and snotty and really, really entitled. Like, apparently he once beat his servant for giving him cold porridge, which is wild. Like, can you imagine being so little and like still
Having that kind of power.
Yes.
It's obviously going to turn you to a shitty person.
Yes, 100%. They also pass like a clock tower, and I'm assuming the clock tower is sort of in the middle of a courtyard.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah.
Celaena like sort of comments that she hates it. We don't get a reason why, and Chaol sort of also admits to hating it. And I guess like they just don't like it. They don't get it at
it's
all.
like a vibe.
Yeah, like neither of them
What
really.
it seems like.
Well, it's just weird because like it's just a random clock tower, yet both of them are like, yeah, no, I hate this thing.
Yeah.
Like, how can you have such strong feelings over a clock tower?
It's just a clock.
Yeah. There's a gargoyle on the clock tower, and it's pointing at a symbol on the ground, which we don't really learn anything about yet, but obviously it's important.
Yes.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have been mentioned. The library is where they go next. So they've gone to a bunch of places. They're going to the library next. There are 4 dragons guarding the entrance, which totally just sounds like the kind of library I would be all over. I'd be like, yes, let's go. It just sounds like something I'd have a lot of fun in.
Agreed.
Celaena sort of, it's the first time she's actually polite to Chaol, because she really likes teasing him and egging him on, and like this is sort of the first honest conversation and by conversation I mean sentence,
Mhm.
where she's like, "Oh, can I please go inside?" So she obviously really, really wants to go if she let her guard down and asked the question. You know what I mean?
Completely agree.
Um, so apparently it's like really huge inside. There's like over 1 million different titles, which again, it's like library goals. Sounds amazing.
Mhm.
So she also sort of admits that she loves to read. She said that she visited the library of Orinth in her home country of Terrassin when she was little. And apparently it was like twice as big as what's there. So obviously we're sort of getting a little bit more of a picture on what her homeland, Terrassin, and well, really Orinth is all about.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, because again, it seems like they are favoring knowledge over power. So like she's like, yeah, we had twice as many books as this, and like also there wasn't an entry needed. Like you could just go whenever you needed something. So she says um that it just makes me think that like Terrassin is like maybe smarter and wiser.
Yeah. That especially it is in her point of view. So I think that does kind of shift it a bit as well. But I do think that you kind of get that vibe that
Yeah.
they are or were more powerful or something. Smarter.
Um she sort of wants to take books out because again it's a library. Uh and Kale is like, "No, you're not allowed. You don't have permission from the king or the prince. Like this is their library. This isn't open for everybody." And it's just sort of like, "Okay, dude, you don't have to be such a jackass." I don't know. It bothered me.
Yeah. It
Uh,
was, yeah, that part was a bit ridiculous. Like she's just asking to read books that he even said in this paragraph or whatever that reading is out of style now. So nobody else is using the books. Why are we telling her that she's not allowed to? It just seems
yeah,
ridiculous.
exactly. So I guess because of this revelation, she goes back to her room and she writes Prince Dorian, like a sort of snarky, sort of jokey letter, um, asking him for the use of his library. Like, can I please go in there and take books?
Hmm.
And fully sort of expecting to say no, I think. Like she was expecting a no from him.
Yeah, I think so too. But it
Um,
was a super cheeky letter that she sent too.
yeah, that's true. So he wrote back that of course she can use the library, but he also sent along 7 of his own books from his personal collection that he said she could read so that they could chat about it. So they're sort of like finding common ground here, which I like.
Hmm.
So she wakes up and it's like noon, like 12 o'clock, and apparently she's like a bit disoriented. Like she doesn't really remember where she is. She does end up remembering that um like the competition is supposed to start today. She was supposed to wake up super early in order to train and whatever. Um but no one came to wake her, so she's a bit like sort of, where is everybody? What's going on? But in her head,
Yeah.
and not as like an old lady. I just sounded like an old lady, that's why.
That's fine. I was
Um
like, why did you say no?
because I felt like I sounded like an old lady.
I get it now. I got it after a second.
So she sort of is just in her room and she's standing on her balcony and she overhears a couple of girls chatting in the courtyard. Um, so there was like one more noble born person and then 2 of her ladies in waiting. The main girl, like the noble, is complaining about um how she wants Dorian's attention even though she's officially courting Duke Perrington. So Duke Perrington was that a-hole from the beginning that shoved Celaena onto the ground um, when she was in chains. So this noble girl is talking about how she's courting him, but how she still wants the prince's attention. Just seems to me like maybe she's just hunting for the better
Ring.
prize. Yeah. Yeah,
Better
ring.
crown, I guess,
Yeah.
in this place.
She also says that like it gets mentioned that everyone is talking about this mysterious woman that Dorian brought back with him, and they called her a harlot. So she's like super pissed that they're calling her a harlot. They don't even know her, but like everybody's assuming that that's what she is and that's what she's there for. So she just takes a flower pot from her room and drops it really close to these girls' heads, which I thought was really funny.
I did too, but then she's like, "Oh, I missed," and I'm like, she's not one to miss. So I feel like she missed on purpose because it would have been really shitty to actually hit one of them with a flower pot.
I mean, hey man, don't call her a
I guess
harlot then. Nobody
True.
call anybody harlots. It's a terrible thing to say, and you don't want a flower pot dropped on your head.
And that's what you'll get. That's what you'll deserve.
Mm-hmm. So I guess Celaena starts getting ready into her nicest dress, and Philippa sort of says like, "Oh, you're so beautiful. It's such a pity that you're an assassin." But yeah, so she says that I guess part of the reason why it bothered her so much is because she said that she doesn't want anyone to think of her as anything, like a lover, a harlot, and anything. Like, I guess she's worried about getting too close.
Of course, yeah.
So Chaol sort of comes into her room and drags her up the stairs. Like, what if she hadn't been dressed?
I know. I don't know what he would have done in this situation.
Yeah.
Been screwed, I guess. Like, not literally, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So Chaol comes in, drags her up the stairs to meet the king. She says that the idea of meeting the king makes her feel faint. It just surprises me that she feels faint about meeting the king, considering like she's so sure of herself over everything else, but yet for some reason this king is making her feel like wonky. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why does this one person matter? Besides the fact that he's a king, but like she doesn't seem like the type to really care about titles like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chaol actually like tries to sort of calm her down and tells her that she looks pretty today, which is interesting considering he hates her guts.
Yeah. You're like, are you just trying to calm her down, or are you noticing that she's pretty?
Yeah. And like it's sort of like in this book it's sort of a hint of maybe he's starting to feel things for her. They get to the throne room, and the throne room has a red marble floor. I've never heard of this. I don't know how this exists. But I feel like its primary function is to hide blood. That gets me.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I tend to think she must have some sort of trauma with the king. Because, like, she sort of can't even look at him. So I wonder if it had something to do with the day she was sentenced to go to Endovier. Like, maybe he was the one who sentenced her or something. Like, there's definitely something going on. The fact that she turns from this, like, strong, self-confident, sure, like, yeah, I'm gonna, like, kick your ass, to like somebody meek and mild and like can't even make eye contact. Like there's obviously some trauma going on.
Yeah.
She I guess takes the time to, instead of looking at the people, instead of paying attention to the king, she pays attention to the other 23 competitors. It's a lot of competitors that she has to try and fight through.
Yeah.
And guess what? They're all men.
What? No way.
Are you shocked?
She's the only woman?
I know. I'm shocked. But she also says that, like, looking in their eyes, none of them has, like, a spark of intelligence. Which, I mean, I guess is a good thing for her.
Yeah.
But, like, really? Nobody could find somebody with a hint of smarts?
And well, why would they do this if they were smart?
Yeah,
Unless you had something on them. Who knows?
exactly. Duke of Perrington. Apparently his champion is like really huge and like full of muscles, and apparently he's very strong physically, but also very dumb.
Mm-hmm.
So the rules of the competition: over 13 weeks, they're all going to train every day, and then once a week, they're going to have an elimination test. So if you lose, you go back to where you were found, and you can go ahead and die if you want.
You're allowed. You're allowed to
Yes.
die.
Yeah. So that's essentially the rules. 13 weeks, training every day, and there's going to be an elimination every week.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like, to me, it's like Survivor or Amazing Race, but
Yes.
just with assassiny sort of things.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so the date for the fight is whoever wins, like whoever's in the final, they're gonna fight a week after Yulemas, Christmas, a little bit.
I think so. That's what I took from it.
Yeah. So I guess the four competitors that are left are
Mm-hmm.
the ones that are gonna fight.
Yeah.
So apparently they were being instructed to like keep your business private, don't talk about the competition, like leave your your stage name or whatever, like make sure that sticks around. Like don't go taking people out, don't go talking about their real identities while they're
Mm-hmm.
doing the competition. So after he explains all this, Celaena sort of manages to meet his eyes really quick. And she says that they really like creep her out, and it makes me feel it. She says it makes her feel like she's in a cage, but she can't look away. I'm assuming his eyes are black.
Mm.
Anyway, so she feels some kind of way.
Yeah.
She says that she feels like the king murdered more people than her. Like, so he should be the one to be hanged for killing all those people.
Mm-hmm.
We all know it's not going to happen. He's the king. He can forgive himself for doing whatever he needs to.
Yeah. But
Um,
I do get what she's saying.
yeah,
Like, she's here, not in shackles at this moment, but basically in shackles, and he's killed more people than her. It seems ridiculous.
agreed. So she's like sort of trying to give him the stare down, and then he stares right back at her. He's like, I'm going to be gone next week, and I'm going to be gone for the whole 13 weeks that you guys are here, which is a long time, I feel like, for a king to leave his sort of area.
And to tell a bunch of thieves and assassins that he's gone for those 13 weeks seems
Yeah.
like a terrible plan. But
And,
go off.
and like, in saying that, I'm well aware that kings and queens used to vacate their castles for like their summer castles or their winter castles. I get that, but like once we get a bit more into the politics of this world, like they're in very significant political turmoil at this moment.
Yes.
So it just seems odd that he's like, "Hey, peace out for 13 weeks." I don't know.
Yes. No, I know what you're saying.
Anyway, so he also says that even though I'm going to be gone, like I can still give the order to murder you. So,
How though?
well, he's not using the word murder. He's using the word kill because they're bad guys, so technically they can be
Yes.
dealt
No, I
with.
know. But logistically, if you're gone for 13 weeks, how is stuff moving fast enough without like
I feel like it
is it
has
is it birds? Is it magic?
I feel like it has to be carrier pigeons.
Or magic, I would assume. Even though magic is gone. Some
Yeah.
kind of technology maybe. I don't know. I don't understand. But
I'm just going to think of pigeons, like hundreds of pigeons just floating around.
fair.
Dorian sort of talks back to them after this whole speech by the king. Uh Dorian starts to like follow them down and says like, "Oh, you did a really good job holding your tongue and not like speaking." She's not talking, not for any like, I don't want to say it's not for a reason because it is, but she says that the way the king was staring at her really affected her.
Mhm.
Um, so I guess they sort of go over her new identity. So her new identity is um Lillian Gordana, who is a noble lady with a dead mother. So, according to everybody, and like she's not just fibbing this, she's not just letting this lie out for um the royalty or the lords and ladies that hang out in the castle. Like this is for everybody, even the other assassins that are participating. They can't know her real identity or who she is. She was a jewel thief by night. Her secret identity sort of hinges on the fact that in their story, she tried to rob Dorian, was not successful, and that's how they met enough for him to pick her to,
Be his champion.
be his champion and be on, I'm gonna say be on his team, but that didn't sound right. Um, so I guess they're walking around right now after the announcement from the king, and they're approached by the lady from the courtyard that Celaena tried to drop a flower pot on when this girl called Celaena a harlot. Her name is Lady Kaltain. And like I find it really hard to describe Lady Kaltain. Like
Mhm.
she's one of those like horrible mean girls. Like she's really smart, but like and she's really beautiful, but like she's only hanging out with you to rise her to like up her station, you know what I mean? And like she sees all other girls as threats, like that sort of
Mhm.
a person.
Yeah. Well, I think Celaena even says earlier that she doesn't like that Caltain's the type of girl to put other women down to look better.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
she really is, but at the same time, like I really dislike her, but I also can't fault her for it. Be-
Well, it's the
it's
type of place they live in.
Yeah, and especially like they're living, our very, very limited interaction with the king. So far, we know that he hits his son and he does not like blink at ordering people killed. So,
Mhm.
I think we can all say with divinity that the king is not a super great person.
He's not a good role model for the men in the community.
Yeah. So, I feel bad for Kalting because she's like we can tell that she's, how do I say it? Like not
Forced
man,
into this role.
yeah, but also like she's not man crazy, but she's like marriage crazy. Like she wants to hurry up and get married and make that connection.
It feels very Pride and Prejudice mother of the
Yeah,
Bennett family. Like it's
yeah,
very that time era. You need a man or you need a skill that is illegal. There's no in between.
yeah. So I feel bad for Kaltain, but at the same time, like I still don't like her.
Hmm.
Um, so she's like sort of flirting with Dorian because he's hot and a prince. Dorian, however, sees through it immediately, like he's not dumb. And he sort of highlights himself flirting with quote unquote Lillian slash
Hmm.
Celaena, and shoves it into Kaltain's face, which is never a good idea. You don't want to make a bitch angry.
No, and it's really like, are you trying to make these two women hate each other or fight after you? It's just, I don't know.
I mean, I think he is.
Yeah, me too.
Anyway, I guess he sort of is like, "Oh, I have to go, ladies." But before he goes, he kisses the back of Celena's hand. So, like, way to go, dude.
Just another
And
show of affection.
yeah, um, and to me, that sort of sent signals that like maybe something would happen between the two of them.
Hmm.
Um, so like I feel like they've already laid the groundwork for like a love triangle between the three of them
Yes, definitely.
because like we get Chaol telling her she's pretty before. Now Dorian is kissing her hand and electric shocks are tingling all the way up, whatever that is.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I just, in my mind, they're laying groundwork for some more.
Yeah.
Chaol's, he walks her back to her room and they sort of chat like they don't absolutely hate each other, which is nice.
Yeah.
Like they're finally starting to maybe see each other um as more than like enemies.
More than their titles, I guess.
Yeah. So he mentions that she should get some rest because the competition actually starts tomorrow, like the training and stuff starts tomorrow.
Hmm.
And then she says she hums all through lunch and supper or whatever, even though she's um not amazing, like she's not an amazing singer, but she still like hums through her supper. And
Yeah.
so yeah, she says she's happy. I guess she's happy to be out and found and alive.
Which can't falter for that.
No. So yeah, that sort of wraps up where we are for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in our episodes, or if you have any book suggestions, you can email us at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com. And be sure to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Coffee and Co Read.
So, next week, we're going to be reading part 2 of Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas, and that is chapter 11 to 22. So, make sure to follow along. And if you're enjoying our chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you find our content. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you on the next page.